and welcome back to another episode of the Lord of the Rings AMA podcast. My name is Matthias Austin, and on this podcast, I invite you to ask me anything about Lord of the Rings, The Hobbit, or anything related to the greater legendarium of JRR Tolkien, and I will do my best to give you as in-depth an answer as I can. And I hope everyone enjoyed my interview with Sean Gunner of the Tolkien Society last week. Sean was just awesome to talk to, and if you haven't yet checked out the Tolkien Society, you really should. They do a lot of great stuff over there to get the good word of Tolkien out to the world, and a lot of great resources, too, for anybody interested in more in-depth Tolkien research. Now, just the quickest of plugs before we start the show for our Patreon, patreon.com/LOTRAMApod, that's patreon.com/Lotramapod, where you can become an official Lotrama pal. Depending on your level of support, you can get up to 5 bonus episodes of this show per month, plus a sticker. So that's all pretty neat. And hey, speaking of Patreon, did you know that the topics each week are voted on by the patrons of the show? It's true. Each week I take the questions that anyone can submit at LOTRAMApod.com and put them up for a vote. But this system only works if the questions are actually submitted, so whether you're a Patreon supporter or not, I do welcome your questions. We're starting to run low, so head to LOTRAMApod.com, LOTRAMApod.com, and click that link for Submit a Question. And this week, the patrons selected maybe the most complex and mysterious topic I've ever had to cover. And the question comes from Neve in Texas, who asks, "Hi Matthias, been listening for a while, but first time submitting a question. Not sure if this is enough to really do an episode on, but I'll throw it out there anyway. As I'm rereading through the Lord of the Rings books, and in the chapter The White Rider in the Two Towers, Gandalf explains how he was sent back until his task is done. Can you go into who the higher power is that sent Gandalf back after falling to the Balrog? And also, when he says he is Saruman, or as he should have been, I assume that's more just speaking about the vacancy of Saruman's place, if you will, since he has become corrupted." Well, Neve, thank you for that question. Yes, it is absolutely enough to do an episode on, as you're about to find out. Now, in many ways, this is a sequel to the very first episode of the show where I talked about Gandalf the Grey becoming Gandalf the White. Now, that was a year ago now, and I have honed my research skills since then, so I'm looking forward to coming back to this topic and bringing in more research and, Tolkien quotes to justify what I had said in that episode, which, by the way, I still pride myself on having nailed it. But we'll get to Gandalf being sent back in a little while. We need to first start with who sent him, and to do that, let's go to the very first sentence of the Silmarillion in the chapter The Ainulindale, the Music of the Ainur. "There was Eru, the One, who in Arda is called Ilúvatar, and he made first the Ainur, the Holy Ones, that were the offspring of his thought, and they were with him before aught else was made." So we are going to start by covering Eru Ilúvatar, who he is, when/where he was operating, before getting into what he actually did, and finishing with the Gandalf of it all, plus sort of how he was perceived and viewed and worshipped in Middle-earth. Now, like Tolkien would want, we're going to start with what the name means. And we get the translation of Eru in that very sentence. It means the one, or in some variations, he that is alone. And Ilúvatar means father of all, with Iluve meaning the all, and Atar, or Atar, meaning father. And while Tolkien didn't believe his work should be viewed as an allegory, for instance, Aslan in Narnia is very much meant to just represent Jesus Christ, Tolkien, he didn't like allegory, but he did conceive that Eru as being a version or facet of the monotheistic God that he, Tolkien, believed in. Now, this goes into his philosophy of subcreation and his theological outlook on the world. As a reminder, I don't believe you need to agree with Tolkien's religious views in order to enjoy his work. But understanding his intent goes a long way to understanding the things he wrote about. So, continuing on, at its very basic level, subcreation is the idea that, 1, God, in the traditional Catholic, Christian, Judeo-Christian worldview, is primarily a creator. 2. Humans, made in God's image, as referenced in the book of Genesis, are also driven to create, but they don't have the inherent ability to create the way God does. So, 3, they become sub-creators, creating things in their own way to reflect the truths they see in God's primary creation. It's why Tolkien would say that his stories about Middle-earth are true, even if they're not real. They are sub-creatively reflecting the truth of the creator. And so within his legendarium, we see that play out as well. Eru Ilúvatar is God, and he takes the place within the world that God of the Bible takes in our world. So Eru has all of the same characteristics that we would say God has. All-knowing, all-powerful, and all-good. Something that friend of the show Peter has already talked about in our free will episode of the show, where he explained to us the idea of the theodicy. So that's who Eru Ilúvatar is. Now, as I mentioned in the Melkor episodes, it's kind of complicated to talk about the timeline of events in the life of Ilúvatar, if you want to call it that, because, well, he lives in a place with no place, and a time with no time. Now, if you struggle to wrestle with that idea, welcome to the club. Another way to think about it is that nothing created Eru Ilúvatar, but he created the Ainur, and that was like the first event we could say about Ilúvatar's history, except, well, event isn't the right word. See, we're entering into the deep theology philosophy section of the show, so we are once again turning to the friend and philosopher of the show and host of Things You Can Do, Peter Owens. Peter, what do you got for us?
Thanks, Matthias. Okay, yeah, this is definitely a weird one, but it's not every day that we're hanging out in the time before time with Eru and the Ainur, so it feels kind of special. The first line of the Silmarillion says, as I'm sure Matthias has informed us, "There was Eru, the One, who in Arda is called Ilúvatar, and he made the first Ainur, the Holy Ones, that were the offspring of his thought, and they were with him before aught else was made." As someone who studied biblical literature, this is actually sort of interesting to me first from a genre perspective, because while it's clear that we're hearing some kind of creation myth, it's actually quite different from what's probably the most popular creation myth in the West, the Genesis account. Bereshit bara Elohim et hashamayim ve'et ha'aretz. Genesis 1:1 tells us, "In the beginning, God created the heavens and the land." The very first thing we hear is the start of the story, Bereshit, in the beginning. The be there is a preposition meaning in or at, and the reshit means the beginning, the start, the first. Sometimes reshit can refer to the first of something in a metaphorical sense, that is, the best, the highest, the cream of the crop, but it's pretty clear in this context it's being used temporally. After Bereshit, we get bara, to create, to shape, or form. A keen ear might hear create equated with shape and form and think, well, wait a second, forming something, like making a mug out of clay, well, that's a whole lot different than making something appear out of thin air. Well, yes, but I think you have to think of it more as an act that creates by forming. There was nothing but clay, and it was formed into a mug that didn't previously exist. To make something be there means to give it the characteristics that allow it to exist, and something with form, either metaphorical or literal, well, that takes up a space in the universe. Then we have Elohim, which is one of the words for God in the Hebrew Bible, and the words for heavens and land. Et hashamayim, the heavens, ve'et, the conjunction and ha'aretz, the land. This word might be familiar to you because ha'aretz is the name of a large newspaper in Israel, or you might have heard it in the traditional Jewish blessing before breaking bread. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech ha'olam, hamotzi lechem min ha'aretz, which means, "Blessed are you, Lord God, King of the universe, who brings forth bread from the land." So what do we notice about this? Well, the whole thing begins with 1, a temporal location, and 2, an act of creating. Modern Hebrew subject-verb order is generally the same as English, subject, verb, object. But ancient Hebrew literature often used verb-subject-object-word order, especially for emphasis. What the ancient Hebrew storytellers here are likely trying to emphasize is that the very beginning of all things here on the earth began with an act of creation. The creation of the thing that we live on, as well as the thing that's up there. Since I don't read Quenya, I just have to go with what Tolkien gave us in English in the Silmarillion, and this seems to emphasize something different than the Genesis creation account. There was Eru, the One. There's no time here, just Eru. And, well, what do we know about Eru? That Eru is the One, of course. The temporality of the sentence is implied only from the reader's point of view. In Arda, we know Eru as Ilúvatar, and the first thing Eru did was create the Ainur. Okay, what's the big deal here, Peter? Well, this is the kind of thing that someone who's trained in interpreting and analyzing this genre of literature, and I think it's fair to say that these are both creation myths of a sort, we'll see as a difference of emphasis. The Hebrew account happens at the beginning of time. The Silmarillion has no such admission. This is a problem because then we get this silly word first. Wait, first means a sequence, and a sequence implies time, and time implies that there was time, and, well, we haven't started with time? Is this just a big mistake? Is this part of the grand mystery that we all play a part in? Does Eru work in mysterious ways? Well, there's actually a very similar problem in Western theology. Plotinus, a 3rd century Neoplatonist, that just means he was doing Plato, but like in his own fancy way. He talks in his most famous work, the Aeneads, that everything that there is proceeds forth from what he calls the One. The One is that which everything else proceeds from, but just because the One had things proceed from it, that doesn't mean that it either lacked anything or that it lost anything. It also doesn't mean that the One was subject to any kind of temporality. It just was there.
But the One has no goal towards which it is moved. We must then not assume it to be moved. When things proceed from it, it must not cease being turned toward itself. We have to remove from our minds any idea that this is a process like generation in time, because here we are treating of eternal realities. We speak metaphorically in terms of generation to indicate the causal relations of things eternal and their systematic order.
So let's be honest, this is pretty esoteric stuff, and you likely had no idea who Plotinus was unless you've taken a master's level philosophy course. But you know who you probably have heard of? Well, a little dude named Saint Augustine, who read Plotinus's Aeneads probably around 386 CE. Who's Augustine? Oh, just one of the 3 most important Christian thinkers of the last 2 millennia. And guess what he says about God and Jesus? That's right, that God, who's kind of like Plotinus's the One, is that which all else, chiefly Jesus Christ, emanates from. So a very long answer to this question would be something like, well, we have a way of talking about something proceeding forth from another thing and maintaining a hierarchy in primacy or hegemony, but without being subject to sequence or time. Augustine even says of God in his Confessions, quote, "When we say that you are before times, we cannot mean that you are before them in time. Otherwise, you would not be before all times." Augustine, and most of Orthodox Christian theology for the next 1600 years, are pretty chill with this explanation. But let me leave you with one wrinkle. And to do it, I want to hijack Matthias' show and introduce my new segment, Explain It Like I'm 5. Explain it like I'm 5. Explain it like I'm 5. I don't have a lot of time, so explain it like I'm 5. Immanuel Kant thinks that the way your mind works is the reason that we think of time the way that we do. There isn't time just out there doing time things. Instead, we think timishly. We don't just have direct access to reality, we have to synthesize it into a time-like kind of thing in order to understand it. So imagine that everything that exists is like a subscription service. So unless I sign up and use the required app, that is my mind, well, then all I get is static that I can't make any sense of. So this mind app, it takes all the staticky information that's out there in the world, like a chaotic Wi-Fi signal, and it feeds it through this algorithm in the app, like meat going into a sausage grinder. The mind app algorithm synthesizes or changes into the right kind of output all that reality signal. When it comes out the other end, well, it comes to us in the form of time and space. Does reality have time and space already included? Well, I'll never know because I'm stuck with my subscription to the Mind app. Unless I can build my own app or my own synthesizing transceiver or find some way to just magically know how to make sense of the pre-synthesized information, I'll never know if time is how the world works or if time is just how my brain algorithm interprets the world. Kant and later thinkers who wrestle with the meaning of time, such as Edmund Husserl, Henri Bergson, Alfred North Whitehead, and a familiar friend we know as Einstein, well, all the things we've learned about time lead us to believe that it isn't just this immutable fact of the universe. There is something about our observation that can change the way time works, or at least the way that it looks to us. So it might be fair to say, to return to Arda, that Eru exists before time, but that to dwarves and elves and men and hobbits who are stuck with a mind that makes everything happen timishly, this will always be sort of a mystery. Back to you, Matthias.
Thank you, as always, to Peter, who is much smarter than me and can explain all of these very complex issues in a way I wouldn't even try to attempt. Also, I really like that he always tries to one-up me in terms of his production quality with all the sound effects and the different songs coming in. It really makes me feel good to invite him on as a guest and see him do amazing things on the show that I can't do. He knows that I'm just joking. Love you, Peter. You're awesome. Thank you. So that covers the when of Eru Ilúvatar. But let's talk about the where. Eru Ilúvatar, and initially all of the Ainur, reside in a place called the Timeless Halls, though this is only referenced once in the Silmarillion. Now, we would likely call this heaven. Interestingly, in the 43rd issue of the Vinyar Tengwar, a linguistic journal dedicated to the study of the languages of Tolkien, there is a version of the Lord's Prayer, one of the foundational prayers across all Christian denominations that Tolkien had translated into Quenya, and in it the word heaven is translated as Eru Mande, which the journal says literally means the blessed dwelling of Eru, and noting that this is the only place that the Elvish term is ever used. And so if you're wondering how you should picture Ilúvatar and the Timeless Halls, well, the answer is you probably shouldn't. Eru Ilúvatar didn't have a physical form, nor, in fact, did the Ainur at the beginning. They were beings of pure spirit. The power by which Ilúvatar created them was the flame imperishable, or the secret fire, and this is what gave life to the Ainur, and indeed, all thinking and speaking life. We talked in our episode about Morgoth how, to quote the Silmarillion, he, meaning Morgoth or Melkor, had gone often alone into the void places seeking the imperishable flame, for desire grew hot within him to bring into being things of his own, and it seemed to him that Ilúvatar took no thought for the void, and he was impatient of its emptiness. Yet he found not the fire, for it is with Ilúvatar. When the Ainur entered the world, which we'll get to the creation of the world in a little bit, their spirits, or Fea, can take on a body and become incarnated. And if that word incarnated is a word you're not familiar with, well, don't worry, Tolkien has got you covered. In a 1954 letter to Robert Murray, Tolkien responded to many questions about the world of Middle-earth. And when talking about Gandalf's death, more on that later, Tolkien wrote, "By incarnate, I mean the Maiar were embodied in physical bodies capable of pain and weariness and of afflicting the spirit with physical fear, and of being killed. Though supported by the angelic spirit, they might endure long and only show slowly the wearing of care and labor. But that cannot be said for Eru Ilúvatar. He is a being that is never, and can never be, incarnated. In a letter to Michael Straight, likely in early 1956, Tolkien wrote, "There is, of course, a mythological structure behind this story. It was actually written first, and may now perhaps be in part published. It is, I should say, a monotheistic but sub-creational mythology. There is no embodiment of the One, of God, who indeed remains remote, outside the world, and only directly accessible to the Valar or rulers. These take the place of the gods, but are created spirits, or those of the primary creation who, by their own will, have entered into the world." And in a 1958 letter to Rona Bear, Tolkien made this point even clearer, saying, "The One does not physically inhabit any pan of Ea." Ea is, of course, the universe. So for all of the Tom Bombadil is Eru Ilúvatar fans out there, well, Tolkien would say that's impossible. But as with all things Tolkien, even that firm stance that Eru cannot be incarnated into the world is questionable. In the History of Middle-earth, Volume 10, Morgoth's Ring, in the chapter Athrabeth Finrod a Andrith, or the Debate of Finrod and Andrith, the idea that one day Eru might incarnate and enter the world is couched as a hope by the ancient men of Middle-earth, a hope that the elves had never even considered. And Andrith says, "They say the One will himself enter into Arda and heal men and all the marring of Morgoth from the beginning to the end." And then they go on to debate if that could even be possible. It's a truly fascinating story, and in like 7 years, when Peter and I get to that as part of our Patreon bonus episodes, we'll have a lot to talk about. But neither Finrod nor Andrith were sure this would really happen, so for now, we'll leave it at Ilúvatar has no physical form that we should imagine. All of this has sprung from that first sentence of the Silmarillion, so let's continue on in the story of Ilúvatar with the second sentence. The Silmarillion says that after making the Ainur, "And he spoke to them, propounding to them themes of music, and they sang before him, and he was glad. But for a while they sang only each alone, or but few together, while the rest hearkened. For each comprehended only that part of the mind of Ilúvatar from which he came, and in the understanding of their brethren they grew but slowly. Yet ever as they listened, they came to deeper understanding, and increased in unison and harmony." And after some time, though again, time isn't a thing here, Ilúvatar gathered all of the Ainur together, and he gave them a new theme of music, one greater than any they had yet heard. And the Silmarillion says that after declaring this theme, Ilúvatar said,
"Of the theme that I have declared to you, I will now that ye make in harmony together a great music. And since I have kindled you with the flame imperishable, ye shall show forth your powers in adorning this theme, each with his own thoughts and devices if he will. But I will sit and hearken, and be glad that through you great beauty has been wakened into song."
And we talked in our episode on Melkor what happened next, with the theme repeatedly getting disrupted by Melkor until it grew into cacophony, finally finishing with this great and terrible chord. And Ilúvatar, after chastising Melkor, then showed the Ainur a vision of what their music truly was, a vision of Ea, the universe, and Arda, the world within it. And the Silmarillion says, "And many other things Ilúvatar spoke to the Ainur at that time, and because of their memory of his words, and the knowledge that each has of the music that he himself made, the Ainur know much of what was, and is to come, and few things are unseen by them. Yet some things there are that they cannot see, neither alone nor taking counsel together, for to none but himself has Ilúvatar revealed all that he has in store." The Ainur were especially surprised by the children of Ilúvatar, elves and men, because they were entirely out of Ilúvatar's thought, and none of the Ainur had a part in their creation. That's why in that letter to Michael Straight, Tolkien wrote, They, meaning men or elves, were not therefore in any sense conceived or made by the gods, the Valar, and were called the Eruhini, or children of God, and were for the Valar an incalculable element. That is, they were rational creatures of free will in regard to God, of the same historical rank as the Valar, though of far smaller spiritual and intellectual power and status. But before this vision of the world was completed, Eru Ilúvatar took it away, so the Ainur didn't see the end of it. And the Silmarillion says, "Then there was great unrest among the Ainur, but Ilúvatar called to them and said,
I know the desire of your minds, that what ye have seen should verily be, not only in your thought, but even as ye yourselves are, and yet other. Therefore I say, Ea, let these things be. And I will send forth into the void the flame imperishable, and it shall be at the heart of the world, and the world shall be. And those of you that will may go down into it."
And suddenly the Ainur saw afar off a light, as it were a cloud with a living heart of flame, and they knew that this was no vision only, but that Ilúvatar had made a new thing. Ea, the world that is. And with the world now created, let's hear a quick word from Vicky and Tanya at the Ex-Baptist Sisters podcast.
Welcome to the Ex-Baptist Sisters podcast. I'm Vicky.
And this is Tanya.
And we are two sisters haphazardly deconstructing our cult-like religious past in an IFB church setting.
That's Independent Fundamental Baptist.
Our desire is to center each episode around a given topic, but at the end of the day, we're just two sisters hanging out.
We will have a chosen topic each episode to educate people with no church background, and also just give fellow survivors an opportunity to share their stories.
The wind is blowing, the rain is coming down, and here we are on someone's porch trying to lead them to Christ. It was like a business.
But we weren't getting paid. We were in the sales department, but our treasures were in heaven, as they like to say.
We're talking to strangers, and then the strangers are sending their kids with strangers to a building they've never been to go to church.
That's how we first got pulled into the cult, was somebody knocked on our door and invited just the kids to come to Sunday school and ride the bus.
So enjoy your front row seat for every tangent and every story, and share yours too at exbaptistsisters@gmail.com. Join us each week as we unpack suppressed memories and share the path we took to leave a strict, oppressive religion and find peace, healing, and joy on the other side. Check out the Ex-Baptist Sisters podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts. Bye.
And we're back. And with the world created, the Ainur went into it and were tasked by Ilúvatar with the job of actually shaping it. Now, we talked about this in our episodes on Melkor and the war of the Valar as they shaped the world. And it would seem that Ilúvatar takes a back seat within this story, leaving the governance of the world to Manwë and the other Valar. But just because he was not physically present in Arda didn't mean that he was not moving within it. For starters, he gave the Valar laws that they needed to abide by, referred to in the Nature of Middle-earth as Oxani, or rules/commandments. In the Nature of Middle-earth, an example they give is that if one of the Ainur, either Valar or Maiar, chooses to incarnate into a physical body, for example, Melian, that body should follow the same rules of the bodies of elves and men. So if you ever wondered if Gandalf had to go to the bathroom, the answer would be yes, according to the Oxani that were placed upon them. And there were other Oxani. For instance, the Nature of Middle-earth says that none shall take by force or indirectly by fraud take from another what he has a right to hold and keep as his own, i.e., don't steal. But beyond that, there were also things called Unati, which the Nature of Middle-earth describes as impossibilities, things that physically cannot happen regardless of will or intent. An example there is the limitations that were placed on the Valar themselves, such as, upon entering the world, the Valar were now bound to it, unable to leave until the end of time, which time, by the way, exists now from the perspective of Arda. And it says that, quote, "They can perceive nothing outside of time, save by memory of their existence before it began. They can recall the song and the vision. They are open to Eru, but they cannot of their own will see any part of his mind. They can open themselves to Eru in entreaty, and he may then reveal his thought to them. But it is physically impossible for them to leave the world. That is an unati. And Melkor, he broke every Aksani that Eru had placed on him, but he couldn't break the unati no matter how hard he tried. Now, hopefully that all made sense. Reading the nature of Middle-earth and some of the history of Middle-earth makes you understand how people can get doctorates in Tolkien studies. There's just so much there. So, okay, Ilúvatar has given laws to follow and set up physical boundaries, but even still, we know he intervened directly throughout the history of Arda. It's something we've covered in quite a few of our episodes, but we're just going to go through a quick recap here. The first instance is when Aule first created the dwarves against the will of Ilúvatar, and instead of destroying them, Eru instead decided to adopt them as his own children. He also, relatedly, allowed for the creation of the Ents and the Great Eagles, in response to Yavanna's plea for the forests to be protected from the axes of the aforementioned dwarves. Now, much to do with the tale of Beren and Luthien was also directly influenced by Eru. Beren shouldn't have been able to pass through the girdle of Melian that protected Doriath, but Melian had foreseen it happening, saying to Galadriel, "And one of the men, even of Beor's house, shall indeed come, and the girdle of Melian shall not restrain him, for doom greater than my power shall send him." As Amaya, only the Valar would have a greater power than her. And as we already established in this episode, the Valar had not seen all of the actions of the children of Ilúvatar in the music, so they couldn't have intervened. They didn't know that Beren was doing this, which means only Ilúvatar could have allowed Beren to pass through. And in that same story, we see the fate of Beren and Luthien changed, with Beren being returned from death, and Luthien being able to join in his mortality. The fates of elves and men could not be altered by the Valar, only Ilúvatar. In our episodes on Númenor, we discussed the fall of that civilization, and in the moment of its destruction, the Silmarillion says, "Then Manwë upon the mountain called upon Ilúvatar, and for that time the Valar laid down their government of Arda. But Ilúvatar showed forth his power, and he changed the fashion of the world, and a great chasm opened in the sea between Númenor and the Deathless Lands, and the waters flowed down into it, and the noise and smoke of the cataracts went up to heaven, and the world was shaken." So literally, Ilúvatar destroys a continent and removes the blessed realm, Aman, from the physical world. And in our episode on fate and free will, we talked about the several instances of at least potential divine intervention in the Lord of the Rings. The chance meeting of Gandalf and Thorin, the finding of the ring by Bilbo. Remember what Gandalf said in the Fellowship of the Ring. "Behind that there was something else at work, beyond any design of the ring-maker. I can put it no plainer than by saying that Bilbo was meant to find the ring, and not by its maker, in which case you were also meant to have it. And that may be an encouraging thought." And of course, the ultimate moment of eucatastrophe, Gollum falling with the ring into the Sammath Naur, the cracks of doom. Though you'll remember in the episode about fate and free will, it's not quite so cut and dried as God pushed him in. But you may notice that I just skipped the most blatant instance of Ilúvatar's intervention in the story, the one that Neve brought up in our question. The return of Gandalf as Gandalf the White. Now, if you are a long-time listener, like the longest-time listener, you'll remember that I talked about this on the very first episode of the show, when I answered friend and philosopher of the show, Peter's question of, did Gandalf know he would level up in D&D terms after he died? And on that episode I said, no, it was Ilúvatar's intervention, and my reasoning was exactly what Neve said in the question. When Gandalf says, "Indeed I am Saruman," one might almost say, Saruman as he should have been. Now I rationalized that the music showed the White Wizard would have helped defeat Sauron, and if Saruman had remained true, Gandalf would have stayed dead. And I stand by that assessment, but back then I didn't know how to do the research like I do now, so I can back this up with Tolkien's own words. And that letter I already referenced to Robert Murray in 1954 in regards to why Gandalf was sent back. Tolkien wrote, "The wizards, being incarnate, were more likely to stray or err. Gandalf alone fully passes the tests, on a moral plane anyway. He makes mistakes of judgment. But in his condition it was for him a sacrifice to perish on the bridge in defense of his companions, less perhaps than for a mortal man or hobbit, since he had a far greater inner power than they, but also more, since it was a humbling and abnegation of himself in conformity to the rules. For all he could know at the moment, he was the only person who could direct the resistance to Sauron successfully, and all his mission was in vain. He was handing over to the authority that ordained the rules and giving up personal hope of success. That, I should say, is what the authority wished as a set-off to Saruman. The wizards, as such, had failed, or if you like, the crisis had become too grave and needed an enhancement of power. So Gandalf sacrificed himself, was accepted and enhanced and returned." Basically, I was right over a year ago when I didn't know what I was talking about. Yay me! If Saruman had been resisting Sauron, there would have been no need to send Gandalf back. In that same letter, Tolkien talks about the abilities that Gandalf returns with, specifically the ability to command, something that seems very similar to the voice of Saruman that is able to influence people. So yes, Neve, Gandalf was sent back to replace what Saruman should have been able to do. While I feel like I could end now, we've answered the question after all, there is more we can say about Ilúvatar and how he interacted with the world. Now, many people have noted that there are no formal religious observances in Lord of the Rings, which struck some critics as odd given Tolkien's own devout beliefs. But in that same letter to Robert Murray, you got a lot of good stuff in here, Tolkien explained why that is. He said, "The High Elves were exiles from the blessed realm of the gods after their own particular elvish fall, and they had no religion, or religious practices rather, for those had been in the hands of the gods, praising and adoring Eru the One, Ilúvatar, the father of all, on the Mount of Aman." So basically, the Valar worshipped Eru in Valinor, and we know the elves there joined in that worship. The festival going on when the two trees were destroyed was a day the Silmarillion says was a high feast for the praising of Eru, when all the peoples of Valinor poured forth their joy in music and song upon Taniquetil. So in Valinor, there was worship, there was religion, but in the lands of Middle-earth, there wasn't. Men, we know, didn't worship Eru, though if you recall our episodes about Melkor, in the First Age, there were some who said that in the earliest days after men awoke in Hildorian, a voice would speak to them, guiding them, and this was the voice of Ilúvatar speaking directly to men in a way he never did to elves. But then Morgoth came among them and turned them away from the voice, and it left the minds of men forever. The only other explicit place of worshipping Eru could be found in the Second Age on Númenor, where the high place of the Meneltarma was hallowed to Eru, and in the Unfinished Tales we read, "Thrice only in each year the king spoke, offering prayer for the coming year at the Erukirme, or the prayer for the coming year, in the first days of spring. Praise of Eru Ilúvatar at the Eru Laetale, praise of Eru in midsummer, and thanksgiving to him at the Eru Hantale, literally thanksgiving to him at the end of autumn. At these times, the king ascended the mountain on foot, followed by a great concourse of the people clad in white and garlanded, but silent. At other times, the people were free to climb to the summit alone or in company. But it is said that the silence was so great that even a stranger, ignorant of Númenor and all its history, if he were transported thither, would not have dared to speak aloud. No bird ever came there save only eagles. If anyone approached the summit, at once 3 eagles would appear and alight upon 3 rocks near to the western edge. But at the times of the 3 prayers they did not descend, remaining in the sky and hovering above the people. They were called the Witnesses of Manwë, and they were believed to be sent by him from Aman to keep watch upon the holy mountain and upon all the land. But following the sinking of Númenor, the only organized religion left was this that we learn from Faramir in the 2 Towers. Before they ate, Faramir and all his men turned and faced west in a moment of silence. Faramir signed to Frodo and Sam that they should do likewise. "So we always do," he said, as they sat down. "We look towards Númenor that was, and beyond to Elven home that is, and to that which is beyond Elven home and will ever be." And with the elves leaving Middle-earth and men forgetting the old ways, though Aragorn's re-establishing of the United Kingdom of Arnor and Gondor delayed that fading for a time, the name of Eru Ilúvatar would likely be lost in ages to come. But just because those in Middle-earth forgot Ilúvatar, it doesn't mean that Ilúvatar will forget them. In the Silmarillion, we read this about the new music that will come after Morgoth is defeated forever following the Dagor-Dagorath, the Battle of Battles. It is said that a greater music than the first still shall be made before Ilúvatar by the choirs of the Ainur and the children of Ilúvatar after the end of days. Then the themes of Ilúvatar shall be played aright, and take being in the moment of their utterance, for all shall then understand fully his intent in their part, and each shall know the comprehension of each, and Ilúvatar shall give to their thoughts the secret fire, being well pleased. And that, Neve, is everything I can tell you about Eru Ilúvatar, he who is alone, the All-Father, whom Tolkien himself called the in-world writer of the story and the author of the great tale. But hey, don't go away, because we'll be right back after this word from Peter at Things You Can Do.
Hi, I'm Peter. I'm host of the ethics podcast, Things You Can Do. Sometimes I have a habit of really belaboring a point to extinction, or doing such a deep dive into an idea that I risk losing the plot. That's why I started doing a new segment called Minute History, where I try to tell the story of an idea in under a minute. So here is a brief history of pre-modern computing. The first analog computer was likely a 1st century BCE device called the Antikythera mechanism. An analog computer is a device that attempts to make a model of the system it's trying to solve or predict. The Antikythera mechanism was meant to map the movement of celestial bodies. 9th century Muslim mathematician Al-Khwarizmi developed mathematical concepts that would lead to the foundation of modern programming and bear his Latinized name, algorithm. 19th century British polymath Charles Babbage designed several machines that performed mechanical and analog functions similar to modern digital computers, like writable memory and RAM. In 1946, the Electronic Numerical Integrator and Computer, or ENIAC, was announced as the first electronic general-purpose computer. It was Turing complete, which means that it's able to be programmed to solve all kinds of different problems in different datasets, rather than just one specific kind of problem. In just a couple years after that, the invention of transistors would launch computing into the digital age. If you want to know more about the history of computing and artificial intelligence, and what that has to do with ethics, join me for my 4-part series on AI this summer 2026 on Things You Can Do, available wherever you get your podcasts.
And we're back. By the way, part 1 of Peter's AI series is out now, and it's already amazing. You absolutely need to check it out. We're still skipping news from Arda for now, so instead we'll turn to This Week in Middle-earth. This entire past week, in the year 2941 of the Third Age, Bilbo and the dwarves have been suffering their way through Mirkwood, and on August 10th, the day this episode is released, King Theoden is buried in the mounds of the kings outside of Edoras, and afterward, in a great feast, Faramir and Éowyn are betrothed. And that's all for This Week in Middle-earth. And now it is time to once again summon the Herald.
And now presenting the Lord of the Rings AMA podcast, Patreon supporters.
On this segment of the show, we take a moment to give due homage to those that support the show on Patreon. We salute you, Pete Plays, Checkered Omega, and Gavin. They are over there enjoying all sorts of benefits, like my monthly review of a Tolkien adaptation, custom-made stickers, and our weekly bonus episodes where we're going chapter by chapter through Tolkien's work, starting with The Hobbit. There's a very small part of me that wants to take those episodes and spin them off as their own podcast, because Peter and I are having so much fun doing that. And I'm learning so much about The Hobbit, more than I ever would have if I wasn't discussing it. So if you want to join in the fun, just head to patreon.com/LOTRAMApod, patreon.com/Lotramapod, and join the small but mighty group of Lotrama pals. But I know that the economy isn't great right now, so maybe financial support isn't in the budget. And that is totally okay. I still want to give you a shout out, though, for supporting the show, which means it's time for this week's
5-star reviews.
On this segment of the show, I read out one of the 5-star reviews that you've left on your podcast app of choice. This week's review comes from Podcast Ratings 923 in the United States, who writes, "Interesting and accessible, 5 stars. As someone who is more of a casual fan of Lord of the Rings, this podcast was easy to listen to and really enjoyable. It's definitely worth your time." Well, hey, thank you, Podcast Ratings 923. I genuinely appreciate that. If you want to be a cool dude like Podcast Ratings 923, all you need to do is head to your podcast app of choice and leave a 5-star review. If you listen on Spotify or YouTube, drop a comment on an episode. Just make sure you say 5-star reviews so I know you want it to go on this segment. And that was today's
5-star reviews.
Thank you once again to Neve and to all of you for listening. If you have a question for the show, you can head to LOTRAMApod.com, Lotramapod.com, and click Submit a Question, and that will put it in the running for the Lotrama Pals on Patreon to vote on. And while you're there, be sure to check out my social media, where every Wednesday I'm putting out a weekly lore video, and on every other day I'm putting out a fun filter game, because, why not? Plus, I go live every weekday on my lunch break answering Lord of the Rings questions on TikTok. And I'm actually going to start doing that on Instagram, too, once I hit 1,000 followers, because they've got stricter rules about going live for some reason. So if you haven't followed me on Instagram yet, do that so I can get that number up. In the meantime, be sure to share the show with a Lord of the Rings fan in your life, and stay subscribed so you don't miss an episode. A huge thank you, as always, to Vicky and Tanya at the Ex-Baptist Sisters podcast, and to Peter at Things You Can Do for their support of the show. To Peter for our stings, he wanted me to particularly mention the 2 tracks in his bonus segment for this week were Patrick Harding, True Bayou Detective, and Cascade, and music for Explain It to Me Like I'm 5 is Hanged, Drawn, and Quartered by Grevin's Tid. And as always, thank you to Michael for our theme music, and to Lauren for our artwork. And that's all for this week. Ilúvatar willing, I'll be back next week. See you then.